Hey friends, it's Marie here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am sharing the new Pops of Color from scrapbook.com. You can see they come in a variety of colors and I'm showing you these rainbow colors today. You can also get a handy case to put them in. I'll kind of give you a glimpse of that as well in my video, but I wanted to talk about these Pops of Color, what they are, what you can do with them, and I'm going to do a few fun cards. So here are my 8 rainbow colors with my Pops of Color. You can see it comes with, you can get a case to put these in. Doesn't come with, but you can get a case. And this case is stackable. So I took the lid off there and I put the bottom on. So if you have more than one of these cases, you can stack them together. The cases also hold your bottles upside down so that when you're ready to use your Pops of Color, they are just there, they're ready to go. And you can see I'm just kind of squeezing that out onto a little non-stick mat. Now I wanted to show you up close what these look like. They have a pearlescent finish, so they are going to be kind of shiny, look like little pearls onto your paper. Now when you get your Pops of Color, you're going to want to get them started. They have a little red stopper inside the nozzle, so you just want to pop off the tip there, and then inside is that red stopper. You can with a tweezer, different tool. It wasn't really working with my tweezers, so I just used my fingers to pull it out. And once you get that red stopper out, you can throw it away. You don't need it anymore, so just toss it, put your nozzle lid back on, make sure it's on correctly and it's on tight, and then you can go ahead and start using your Pops of Color. Now, what are the Pops of Color? They're basically a dimensional type, I don't want to say paint, but I know we're all familiar with Nuvo drops. They're similar to that, but I want to say the consistency is different. They are not the same consistency as Nuvo drops. As I've used Nuvo and I'm using Pops of Color, I kind of noticed that these drops are a little bit more like whipped cream in my mind. These Pops of Color seem a little bit more light, a little bit more airy than the other drops that I've worked with. Now here I'm not actually making a card or anything. I've just cut out these fun rainbows from scrapbook.com with a white and a dark paper. I wanted to see the difference that these Pops of Color look like on lighter versus darker paper. You can see they're opaque. They don't show anything through them. They dry dimensional. They're pearlescent and they're just really fun to work with. I'm just using these rainbows as kind of a just a scrap piece of paper or something to get used to playing around with these Pops of Color, get used to how they flow out of the bottle, and just wanted to see those differences in color on different colors of paper. Now you can go ahead and wipe these up with your baby wipe or anything. They're really easy to clean up. I'm going to go ahead and make a simple card and just show you how you can use these Pops of Color as little dimensional accents on your cards. So I have this Cards for Kindness stamp set from scrapbook.com. It's got this cute little image here of an envelope with a heart on it, and I'm just going to stamp that all over my background so that I can make a really cute little card background. Just using my stamp block and some black ink, and I've got those all stamped out. Now I wanted to put some fun color onto those little hearts, so I'm using the Pops of Color and I'm just going to go ahead and fill in those heart areas with different colors of these Pops of Color. Now you have that little nozzle there and it's easy to kind of direct where you want your Pops to go. And like I mentioned, they dry dimensional, so if you have a lot piled up on those hearts, they're going to be more dimensional, they're going to be more fluffy. And if you only put a little bit down, it's going to be flatter. So you really can kind of control how much you want on your background. And if you put more of these Pops of Color down, it's going to take longer for it to dry. But if you take just a little bit, if you just use a little, it's not going to take very long to dry at all. I did this card front or background, I set it aside, I worked on some other projects, and when I came back to it, they were already dry. So just adding a little bit of these Pops of Color to your background, it's not going to take very long for them to dry. Now you might want to let them set for several hours, even if they feel dry, just to make sure that they are completely dry all the way through. And especially if you use a very thick application, you're going to want to give it time to dry. So I went ahead and I just put a sentiment on this card and finished it off, and I really love that pearlescent color you get from those pops of color. So another technique I'm going to show you here is stenciling with these pops of color. Now I've done this with different mediums before, and I think we all like to see the little squeeze bottles and think that there's just for making little round drops on your cards, but this is a fun medium that you can work with to do other things as well. So I wanted to show you how I stenciled with it and a few tips to get some good results here. Now I always like to go ahead and tape my card front down from the back of the stencil. That way it's taped down, it's not going to move, and your tape is not in the way of the stencil, so you can get a full stenciled background on your card. I've just squeezed out some of those pops of color, and I'm taking this scraper from scrapbook.com and I am just going to spread it all over my stencil. Now you can see there I put a little bit of drops at the top and I scraped it down, and it's not making a very good stenciled background at all. So I went ahead, I put that stencil back on, and I'm putting more of these drops, and I'm kind of squeezing it all the way down in the areas that I want it to go. This time when I took my scraper or spreader, whatever you want to call it, I had more drops to spread, and it really got into that stencil and made a really fun background. Now, if you want to, you can kind of scrape them into each other so those colors blend a little bit, and that's what I did. And I really love this mod circles background with that pearlescent pops of color. It really looks like it's meant for stenciling. You get a nice even application. And I wanted to say, before you go ahead and clean off your stencil, you can spritz it with a little bit of water. I took another background and I just pressed it into that stencil, and I'm picking up some of that leftover color from my stencil, and I'm making another impression on a background. So you can actually get two different designs from this stencil. You can get the positive and the negative design. You're going to want to let it dry, but you can see you get that bold background from stenciling directly onto your paper, and then you get a little bit more of a faint background if you pick up that color with another piece of cardstock. So I set those aside to dry, and I wanted to show you how you can use these pops of color on some die cuts as well. I've cut some of these words from some scrapbook.com dies, and I'm just putting them back into that area of paper that I cut them out of. So it's going to hold them in place as I spread some of these pops of color on. Now I'm kind of doing what I did with my stenciling. I'm just squeezing a little bit onto the tops of my letters here. I'm not trying to cover the whole thing because I'm actually going to spread this out and color it by spreading it. So I don't have to go ahead and just put these on all the areas of my paper. I'm taking my finger and I'm just going to rub that color on. And I'm kind of getting those colors to blend together. You ended up not really seeing much of that pink on the S, but that's okay. I like the way that the green and the blue and the yellow all blended together. Now once you have your die cut covered, you can just pull it out of that cardstock carefully and set it aside to dry. I wouldn't let it dry inside of the cardstock. It might stick, so it's probably better to pull it out while it's wet and set it aside. But you can see it gives it a really kind of light, almost watercolor look with that pearlescent finish, and I thought it was really pretty. So I did another word here. I did hello with some of those pinks and purples and blues, and I stuck that on my stenciled background, and I think it's just a really fun, simple way to use these pops of color. Now, one of the easiest ways that you can use the pops of color is just adding accents to your colored images. Here I've got some flowers which are perfect for these pops of color. You can go ahead and add little drops here and there to fill in little berries and branches and the centers of your flowers. Now I used alcohol markers to color this image. I haven't tried the pops of color on top of a distress ink or a water-based ink yet, so I'm not sure if it will make your colors run at all. That's something that I'm going to be experimenting with. I know when I've used Nuvo drops in the past, if I use a very light color on top of distress ink, the pops of color will actually soak up some of that ink from that reactive ink, and it will discolor your drops. I have not tried that with the pops of color yet, but I think I'm going to be trying that as I work with them more. But you know, if you put them over a alcohol marker or some other kind of permanent color, it should not run. So another thing I wanted to talk to you about is just how to make your drops look somewhat round. It's hard to make a perfectly round drop, but if you watch what I'm doing here, I'm just squeezing a little bit out, and then I kind of swirl that tip of the drop back into itself. So I'm not leaving a peak. I'm swirling that nozzle back into that round drop so that I'm not getting a peak with my pops of color. And I'm just practicing here, and I'm squirting these out onto a non-stick mat. And I'm going to let them dry. You can definitely go ahead, squirt out a bunch of these drops. Use this for practice. Just practice swirling that tip back into that round drop, and then let them dry. And later you can come back and scrape them off of this nonstick mat, and you have your pre-made little drops or dots that you can add to your projects. You can make them bigger or smaller depending on what you want to do, what you want to use them with, but you can definitely go ahead and pre-make a bunch of these. They didn't stain my non-stick mat at all, and they did come off really well when I came back later to scrape them off. I used my scrapbook.com scraper, just the same one I used for my stenciling, and I just scraped them all off when they were dry. So making some of these dots ahead of time gives you some pre-made embellishments. It also gives you some practice with swirling those drops into themselves, making some really nice pearlescent round drops. And that's all I have for you today. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of first look at the pops of color from scrapbook.com. Lots of things you can do with these. I feel like I'm going to be experimenting with them more in the future, and I just wanted to give you a look and some tips and inspiration. So if you liked this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Just tap that bell for notifications, comment and share, and just do all the things. I will catch you guys next time. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.